Okay, welcome to the Dirt on Compost for the city of Manchester, Missouri. I'm Jean Ponzi, Green Resources Manager for the Earthway Center, which is the Sustainability Division of Missouri Botanical Garden. Back with you in June 2021 after having had the opportunity to come out there and present in person in February of 2020, right before we all had to stop doing that kind of thing. So I hope that if you are listening to this presentation, live on June 10th or on demand, that you have composting going in your yard and that it's helpful for problem solving. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat and I will answer them as we go along. This is one of my favorite subjects. When I used to go to national recycling conferences earlier in my career, I would always go to the compost sessions, and it just, I don't know what it is about compost and decomposition. I think it's because it's so close to the plants and it is nature's super duper ultra efficient model of dealing with waste stuff has always really appealed to me. So a little bit of sustainability 101 here to start with. Everything in the natural world is connected, and ecology, green stuff, is all about connections. It's all about things working in systems. It's all about interconnection and interrelationship and interdependence, which kind of might run counter to how we think about being human and what we think we might be able to understand. But in fact, we are all hardwired. We are walking, living, dynamic, integrated systems. And therefore we have an innate understanding of how this stuff works. Every system in our human bodies, reproductive system, musculoskeletal, the nervous system, the immune system, our circulatory system, each one of those does its unique job, but they have to work together as an integrated whole in order to have a healthy organism. And that kind of systems dynamics, that's nature in a nutshell. It's big nut. Also, in the natural world, everything works in cycles. Do this with me. What next? And then, right? And our autonomic nervous systems are, once again, hardwired to maintain this essential life support function, respiration, taking in oxygen. And who do we get the oxygen from? The plants, which is the waste product of their respiratory process. And they take the waste product of our process, carbon dioxide, and combine that with sunlight and create sugar, i.e. food, for all living things. That kind of generosity, that kind of reciprocity, that is what is embodied everywhere in the natural world. And when we humans tune into that and get on that wavelength of being an exchange, first of all, we become more respectful, more humble in a way, kinder, more appreciative. It's a good thing. And we also get more in tune with how the entire biosphere works in and around us, as opposed to working against it. So systems, cycles, rah, rah, rah. The other big thing, another major sustainability 101, and this leads right into the topic for tonight, composting. Everything in the natural world becomes food or habitat for some other organism quickly when the original user of that resource is no longer using it, whether it's dead bodies or last year's nest or leftover lunch or poop. Somebody eats it, lives in it quickly, completely, elegantly. And so zero waste is the functional reality in the natural world. Our human recycling systems, taking materials that we have manufactured and sending them on through recycling to become the feedstock, waste equals food, for manufacturing new products with recycled content that is mimicking the gloriously flawless cycles of decomposition that nature is employing. I'm going to start with yard waste here because that's where we started in Missouri with composting as a practice. Gardeners have composted as long as, you know, people have been growing food, because when there's waste from gardening, when you let that transform through decomposition, you have supercharged, locally produced super plant food. the stuff that comes out of our yard, leaves, branches, all kinds of trimmings, was banned from Missouri landfills in 1991. Senate Bill 530 established that ban, also banned things like lead acid batteries, waste oil, appliances, and whole tires from landfills, and set up a network of solid waste districts around our state to administer grant funds that come from a surcharge on the tipping fees, the amount per ton that anybody pays to dump stuff in a landfill. That fund is distributed in the form of grants in and around our state of Missouri, and that helped jumpstart commercial composting programs when yard waste was banned from landfills. Now, St. Louis County has an additional charge, a surcharge on top of tipping fees, and that creates a pool of resources that St. Louis County Department of Public Health distributes in the form of grants to municipalities in St. Louis County. That is what supported composting education and compost supplies earlier this year for the city of Manchester. And other parts of the state, some of those programs, some of those services are in place. There still is burning of yard waste that is practiced, sort of allowed in parts of the state. But if you can transform organic waste into plant food, why would you want to send it up in smoke? I have to ask. And food waste is separately permitted from handling yard waste in St. Louis County by our Missouri Department of Natural Resources. And we have one business in our region that is permitted to compost food waste as well as yard waste. That is St. Louis Composting. We have other organics management firms like Hanson's Tree Service up in St. Charles County. There are some little, I would call them kind of community composters, little enterprises like BLH Farms and Moshrooms and Perennial City Composting that for a fee, a modest fee, will come and take your organic matter and compost it. Those are primarily farms, urban and suburban farms that are producing compost for their own use, but that are taking food waste from consumers as a sort of a valet service. And this year, for the first time, we also have a pilot of collecting food waste at a couple of farmers markets. Those are a little on the far side from Manchester. They are Tower Grove Farmers Market in the city of St. Louis and Ferguson Farmers Market. That's a pilot for a project from Earth Day 365, our local Earth Day organization. Why compost food waste? Why deal with food waste any way other than putting it in the landfill? Well, first of all, there's a lot of it. And we also have a food waste messaging campaign that is in the works in our region. It will be a first cousin to Recycle Responsibly, our regional recycling messaging campaign, and it will roll out sometime this summer. So there'll be a lot of good education about how to prevent food waste in the first place, how to make use of food before it goes to waste, and composting will be a part of that process. I'm going to skip a slide here. I'll go back to those because this is the US EPA's food recovery hierarchy. It's an inverted pyramid. And you can see that composting is second from the last choice for what to do with food before it becomes waste. The first thing, the best thing, is to reduce it in the first place. And that takes some planning, that takes some thought. And we don't always all have the energy and the attention to do that, but look to our food waste messaging campaign to come out, as I said, later this summer. Getting food to people who are hungry, distributing food where it is needed. And there are terrific systems in our region to do this. Operation Food Source, St. Louis Food Bank. There are businesses and enterprises that make a practice of getting food to people before it goes to the compost. Getting food to animals. That, again, there's a partnership with urban and primarily smaller scale agriculture at this point. Industrial uses such as turning food scraps or organic waste into biofuels, and then composting. And the last choice is landfilling. And then the cat walks in front of your screen. That's one of the magic moments of Zoom. In a moment, she will bite me. Bye-bye. Oh, this is what I was going to show you. Yes. So here's our world champion St. Louis Cardinals. They have been doing food distribution, and food waste diversion for composting since 2009. And they have been honored twice by the US EPA as part of the Food Recovery Challenge, most recently in 2016. The Cardinals have a system where any food that is prepared in the Cardinals Club or the concessionaires, if it isn't sold at a home game, it goes immediately to coolers on the loading dock that Coca-Cola donated. And then that food is transported quickly while it is still edible and still good to a shelter nearby where people get to eat it. And then anything that was prepared back of house is composted at Busch Stadium. I might have a problem here with this cat. Help, I need cat control. Okay, and I got to go back a couple slides. Okay. Whoops, no, she's making me go forward. This is bad. Oh, right. This is another reason why we want to deal with organics, and composting is a very smart way to do that. Because with all of the food that is in our waste stream, about 21% of everything in our municipal solid waste stream is food waste. That stuff decays, decomposes faster in landfills than other kinds of materials. And when that happens, methane is emitted. That is emitted with anything decaying in landfills. And methane is a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So we want to make sure that we make good use of food first and then manage it in a good way. And we're talking about yard waste here, your garden waste, as well as food waste. Just a little slide here that shows people's attitudes, people's thoughts about, I never thought about this. Well, I didn't know what else I could do. I don't know, what do those expiration dates mean? This will be more information in our regional food waste messaging campaign. Back to composting. It is practiced on a large scale by our store chains. Schnucks and Dierberg's, locally owned grocery chains, both have contracts with St. Louis Composting. And when food that is past its sale point cannot be donated to food banks, and there's criteria for understanding that food is collected for composting. So it decreases landfill costs, it makes better use of that material from grocery stores. But again, the hierarchy of getting food to people that need it, or feed to animals in some cases, is practiced with a higher priority level than composting. This is the basic recipe. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty here. I'm going to probably say this, and then I'll take a moment and take a couple questions. This is how nature does it. This is how we do it. 3 parts, carbon containing what is called brown matter. Typically, it is actually brown. It's like leaves. It's dried out stuff. It's rotting logs on a forest floor. It is where the carbon, like carbohydrates in our diet, comes to fuel the process of decomposition. Decomposition will happen, but when you have the right mix of carbon-containing brown matter, 3 parts, to nitrogen-containing green matter, 1 part, that's the stuff that's still wet, that was most recently alive, plus a little H2O, plus a little oxygen that fuels that process. It's a thermophilic process. With decomposers doing work over time, voila, compost happens. And whether that is happening in nature unaided, or whether it's happening in a bin or a container in one of our yards, that is occurring wherever formerly living stuff is able to decay. Once whatever was living in those bodies, whether it was a plant or an animal, is no longer living there. And the miraculous thing that compost does, when you use compost as a soil amendment, there are little cartoon guys down there. They're like little Sputniks. Am I dating myself or what? They're like little atomic structures holding soil particles apart so that water and nutrients can percolate through them, and holding soil particles together to prevent erosion, restoring a sense of humus and health to soil. Let me see if we have a question or two here in the chat. Let's see. Last year, the composters did not have a bottom, and because of a lot of rain, the composters absorbed a lot of groundwater and the waste became very soggy. Yeah, those composters, you don't really want a bottom in a compost bin. If you have something that's totally contained, like maybe a compost turner, okay, that's a container. But no, those were open bottom things. And when that happens, you can adjust the recipe. So if your compost is getting too wet, because in this case, organic matter was absorbing water from the soil, you need to add, what is it that you need to add? More brown matter. You need to beef up the dry stuff. If your compost container, if your compost process gets too dry, which can happen in the summer when we go through droughty periods, then you need to add some water and turn it. You need to hydrate it, and you probably need to turn it. And sources of carbon containing brown matter, especially in summer when everything is green, could be brown paper bags torn up, could be phone books, which are all printed with soy ink. There are no solvent-based inks in phone books, and that paper decomposes very readily, much faster and more effectively than, say, office paper. It could also be if there are places on your property or in your community where leaves were not raked up, and you can go and get them. Let's see, Vincent, you are saying, I have a composter from the city of Manchester. Could you please review where the composter should be placed to comply with the city requirements? Ooh, this is something that Megan Huther might want to weigh in on. I believe, yes, there are specific requirements for placement relative to your neighbor's property, to property lines. One of the things about placing a compost pile or a compost container, to me, first of all, it's helpful if it's close to where you're coming out of your house with your compost bucket, or you're coming away from your garden with the stuff you want to dump on the pile, so that you make that access as convenient and barrier-free for yourself as possible. Also, I like to keep compost piles especially, but also containers in the shade. The compost containers that Manchester purchased are black plastic. And if those were sitting in the direct sunlight, you would have your composting process probably get so hot that it would stop. Megan is checking on that. Thanks. She's going to type that into the chat. Aaron says, I've been attempting to compost since we got the bins last year. Your compost is very slow to decompose. May not be hot enough. Well, one of the things about that, Aaron, one of the things there with that kind of a compost container, they were like the black plastic beehive shaped containers, has to do with the mass of material. If you're going to build a compost container, the one that you're seeing here in the photo is about 1 cubic yard. It's approximately 3 by 3 by 3. And that is a good dimension, that is a good mass and volume for decomposition to happen as rapidly as possible. When there is less volume in the space, the process slows down. So if you were trying to produce compost to support your work as a gardener, you might want to augment your compost container from the city of Manchester with a pile. Or let's see, I think I have coming up here a couple of other, I'm going to skip ahead, a couple of other bin types. Here's a photo of the kind that Manchester got. These are called earth machines. And yes, the bottom is open. It's ideally sitting on soil, but yep, that can wick moisture up into the mix. You can make an easy compost container out of a circle of like snow fencing. You can do that with plastic snow fencing held up by metal poles. You can you can build a compost bin very simply out of shipping pallets. And most shipping pallets are not pressure treated. They do not have creosote or any kind of rot resistant stuff on them. Most pallets are either pine or oak. So if you can get a hold of 4 shipping pallets, you could hinge them together on the sides and leave one side with a hook that opens up so you can get into it there are really good patterns and instructions on the internet for making compost bins. Let's see, let me look back in the chat and the Q&A. And compost starter, you know, you're asking Erin about adding compost starter. You can get little, you know, packages of stuff, but really all you need to do to throw in starter is a trowelful or a shovelful of garden soil. And that's what introduces the microorganisms into your compost bin. And again, if what you have in your bin is soggy or smelly, it needs more brown matter. It's too wet. If it's dry, if you reach in and grab a handful of that and it feels like a well-wrung sponge, you've got the right amount of moisture. If it's crackly, you need more green matter, and that's where you need to fish out more. You know, either you need to eat more lettuce and toss in more lettuce butts, or you need to get some plant trimmings from a fellow gardener. How do I feel about accelerator additives? Me personally, I think they're unnecessary. I think they're a gimmick. I think they're a product that someone sells. I don't know that they actually will accelerate the decomposition process, and then you're just buying another thing in another package. Can you compost in the ground itself? Wilka Vincent asks. Yes, in fact, you can, and I will show you a slide for that. This is a method that is includes putting something in the ground. It's called bokashi. It is a decomposition process that comes, I believe, originally from Japan, but it could be from Korea, where there is not a huge amount of land to do stuff. What bokashi involves is having material in a bucket with an additive that causes it to ferment. And I'm forgetting what that is. It's not the same as like buying a compost accelerator. It's like bran could be an additive that would cause the organic matter to ferment. In the bucket, it partly ferments for a period of time, and then you dig a hole in your garden, in your yard, a shallow hole, and you put that stuff in the hole and cover it back up, and it continues to decompose in that hole. I'm not adept with this by any way, shape, or form. I know just that much about it. I have never tried bokashi composting, but if you'd like to learn more about it, we offer classes periodically from the Missouri Botanical Garden. Let me check the chat again. Oh, good question. What about insects in the composting bins? Well, Savita Baga, that depends on what kind of insects. If they're sow bugs or millipedes or pill bugs, they're decomposers. That are the ones you have. And the question about gnats and fruit flies. Gnats, yes, you will have. Gnats are attracted to things. Fruit flies, they're very attracted to bananas. Time flies like an arrow. Fruit flies like banana. So in your compost container out in your yard, I would not worry about gnats or fruit flies. In your compost container in your kitchen, the stuff you're putting your salad fixings and your vegetable trimmings and your coffee grounds in to go out to your compost bin, do not put banana peels in that little bucket, because you will have fruit flies quickly, even in the winter. Sometimes I get fruit flies in my compost bucket in the kitchen. So I don't put banana peels in my compost. Where I throw them, I have ivy, English ivy in my beds in the front yard. I throw my banana peels out there under the ivy, but I don't tell my husband. Let me check another question here. These are really, really good questions, and they are helping. Moths, I wouldn't worry about moths. You know, insects in nature are a normal thing. When you have insects, when there are insects eating things, that is a good thing. Little insects like beetles, but brown in color, not millipedes or centipedes, I wouldn't worry about that. And yes, there you go. Banana peels, that's the issue. Banana peels are anathema to compost without fruit flies. Let's see if I'm missing any questions. If there are mosquitoes or spiders in the bin, does that indicate an imbalance? It would be very unusual that you would have mosquitoes breeding in a compost bin, because mosquitoes need to breed in standing water more than would be on the soggy ground at the bottom of your bin. Spiders, I would not worry about spiders. in any way, shape, or form. Spiders are wonderful predators. If you have spiders in and around your compost, you're doing good. Let's see here. I saw another question. Pineapples and watermelon rinds be composted. Yes, but in the kind of container that you may have from the city of Manchester, those things are really big. They're going to take up a lot of room, and they're chunks of stuff. And who is doing the decomposing work here? I'm going to go back a few slides to my decomposers. Most of the work of decomposition is being done by microorganisms, fungi and bacteria. And they have little tiny teeth. And fungi send out little rhizomatous villi. They don't have any teeth. So what you need in order to make your material as efficient as possible for these microscopic decomposers to work is to have your stuff in smaller chunks. Now, that doesn't mean run your watermelon rinds and your pineapple, cuttings through a food processor, because that's kind of goofy. And then you probably might as well be running your stuff down the garbage disposal. But just be aware, when there's big chunks of stuff like that, especially in a small bin, not going to decompose as quickly or as completely very quickly, because they are big solid items and microorganisms can't get to them. Bigger critters, and look at the diversity of critters that you will find in a compost bin or a compost pile, potentially. Different kinds of mites, centipedes, various kinds of beetles, ants, springtails, earthworms, redworms, sow bugs, mites. There are many, many kinds of insects that are macroorganisms that are just fine in your compost bin. The only kind of decomposer, big critter, that you would not want to find in your compost bin would be right over here, and that is flies and fly larvae, which are also popularly known as maggots. Most people don't want maggots in and around their compost. But what do maggots decompose? Animal matter, not plant matter. So in order to manage this, let's see, which way am I going to get back to the photo that I want? I think I'm going this way. And the cat is now laying. Oh, thank you. Thank you, dear. She's now laying on my computer keyboard. Oops, back. Okay. This is the do's and don'ts of composting. Remember, we covered this in those in-person sessions. Plant matter can go in your compost container or pile. Any kind of animal matter, dairy, milk, eggs, oil. Yes, a lot of oils are vegetable oils, but oils also tend to attract critters that become more of a pest than a facilitator. No butter, no meat. Well, butter is an animal product, and absolutely no meat of any kind. So if you have flies in your compost, in and around your compost, there probably is some animal matter in there. And I would just not make sure that you don't put any more animal matter into your compost. Chat. What about eggshells of boiled eggs? Yeah, you can, well, eggshells can go in the compost. They will break down. Yes, I will make an exception for that, but there are actually better uses for eggshells. You can see that the eggshells are on the nice list. Eggs themselves are on the naughty list for what you can and cannot compost. Eggshells are great to save if you have slugs in your yard, especially if you are growing plants in your garden that slugs like to eat, like lettuces. You can put little crumbly circles of eggshells around those plants, and they will be like trying to maneuver over glass for slugs. So you can use them as a barrier, but you can also put them in your compost. They will decompose. Coffee grounds, tea bags, nuts are fine, vegetable stuff. The squash that I mentioned earlier that turns out to be too old was sitting in a basket in my kitchen upstairs. That is leaking some brown stuff on my floor. I'll have to clean that up after this talk. That is going to go right out on the compost when I'm done. Megan says, we ask that residents keep composters in the backyard and use common sense courtesy with your neighbors. Looking at the code, that looks at the code, but again, common sense amount of sunshine. Compost will happen in deep shade. It probably will do better in deep shade than it will do in more sunshine. And I would not put a compost container in full sun, especially not the black ones that you have purchased in the city of Manchester. They just get too darn hot. And seeds like avocados, avocado pits will decompose very slowly. They will also start avocado plants on your compost pile. I have several of those sprouting in my compost pile. Harder seeds like peach pits, apricot pits, they will decompose over time. Yes, they just, in a smaller compost container like your black bins, they will be taking up space that other softer, mushier stuff might be better using. And okay, so that I was just looking at the Q&A. That was good. I think I covered everything in the chat. Now let's see. This is, I don't think I showed this when I came out to Manchester. This is me and my compost pile. Now I live in the city of St. Louis, and this is in my backyard. The fence that you're seeing there is a fence between my backyard and a part of my front yard. So it's screened off by a little fence. This is how I prefer to compost. It's an open pile. It's got 3 sides, using old landscape timbers as the backs and the sides. And I just pile stuff on there. I haven't turned it for years. You can see that there's a lot of leaves left over from the fall, starting on the top of the pile. This photo was actually shot, I think it was shot in March or maybe very, very early April, based on what I'm wearing, fleece shirt and my fleece hat. So there's a lot of leaves, not much like grass clippings or other green plant clippings and trimmings. And then that I have a little plastic, it's like a little miniature 5-gallon bucket. Pickles were sold in it. I got it from O'Connell's Pub up the street from Missouri Botanical Garden. I use those little fibers as my kitchen compost bin. They have a lid, they have a metal handle, wire handle, just like holding a 5-gallon bucket. And the kitchen compost containers that you all got are much more attractive, frankly, and will do just as well as a plastic little fiber. So I put this in just to show people how I personally compost, and it works just fine. Now, I am not a food gardener. Our place is pretty much a forest in the city. We have about this much direct sunlight. It's enough to grow 1 basil plant every year. That's it. So I'm not producing compost to support a garden. If you are producing compost to support a garden, you might want to create a bin system. Oops, wait now. Go forward. That is more like this. Okay, yeah. This kind of 3-bay compost bin where each one is 3 by 3 by 3, 1 cubic yard, and they're right next to each other, and the boards pull up through slats so you can open up the whole thing all the way down to ground level. 1 bay, you're feeding with fresh stuff, 3 parts brown matter to 1 part green matter. 1 bay, you've stopped feeding, it's decomposing. You turn that. The 3rd bay in this picture, the one on the right, is the one where the stuff has decomposed and you can use it. And if you are a serious gardener, and you are a vegetable gardener especially, and you want to produce compost as super organic food for your vegetables, this is the kind of system that I would really recommend, because you're continually feeding, producing, using, and the time frame of about 6 to 8 weeks, a little faster in the summer, unless things dry out too much, that will rotate through those bays so that you can have compost pretty much whenever you need it. And then I just gave a talk for the city of Brentwood on Tuesday, and they have purchased compost tumblers on stands like the one that you see here in the lower right. And those are 2-bay tumblers. So you can have 1 bay that you're feeding and the other bay where decomposition is just happening. So it'll be interesting to hear how Brentwood residents like that. Another question. No, I think I answered that. Q&A. Nothing else new in the chat. All right. If you are looking to expand on your black compost bin from the city of Manchester and go into more bins, you can get DIY how to make compost bins really, really easy online, or you can send an email to us at the Missouri Botanical Garden, greenresources@mobot.org, and I will send you a link to where to get those instructions. You can just Google DIY compost bin and you will come up for instructions to make all these kinds of things. Here's the recipe again, and it is conveniently shown in the outline of the kind of compost container that Manchester residents have. 3 parts brown matter. This is the carbon source, the energy source that fuels decomposition and keeps it going. Dry leaves, shredded paper, dried materials. You do want some small sticks, even in a container like this. And when you mix it all up, what those do is they're little spacers. They allow moisture and oxygen to percolate through. You don't want to put a lot of sticks in your compost because they're big, they're solid. They're going to take a long time to break down. 1 part green matter, and here's your top layer brown, middle layer brown, bottom layer brown. That just is showing you different kinds of brown matter, dried leaves, dried grass or other plant matter, other kinds of dried out stuff from your garden, or brown paper, shredded brown paper. And again, brown paper, craft paper is better than office paper because it's a lower grade paper. It will break down faster. And then 1 part green matter, the stuff that just came out of your kitchen. It's got the most nitrogen in it. It's the wettest. Plants only, no animal stuff. And you want that moisture level right down here. You want it to feel, when you reach in and you grab that stuff, you want it to feel like a well-wrung sponge, damp, not goopy. And if the sponge has shriveled up and it's hard and it's crackly, then you need to add some moisture and you need to do a little mixing. And that can be a little challenging in a container like this, but it can be done. And when you start the whole thing, or if the process is slowed down, dig up a couple handfuls or trowelfuls of garden soil and toss them in there and just kind of stir it around a little bit. Maybe that the person who said my compost is happening so slowly, maybe a little more decomposers from your garden soil, and that will be microorganisms that you're putting in there. You're not worrying about getting in like more worms. What about the weekly sale papers from Deerbergs? That's a good question. Again, those are, well, they're newsprint, and newsprint, like phone book pages, is a relatively low grade of paper. It will decompose relatively quickly, but you want to tear it up. You don't want to just put wads of newsprint in there, because the more edges, the more surface area you have, the more decomposers can get to it. But the shiny stuff, the coated paper, that is, it's not going to introduce any toxic stuff to your compost, but it is going to be more substantial and it will decompose much more slowly. Yes, you can use newsprint as a source of brown matter. Absolutely, you can. And you don't have to worry about anything being toxic in there. Long ago, the printing industry stopped using solvent-based ink and switched to soy-based inks for almost all commercial printing. So let's see, vermicomposting. I mentioned this when I was out in Manchester. If you live in an apartment, or you become a composter and then you move to an apartment, or you're a teacher and you want to have composting in your classroom, a worm bin is a way to do that. Vermicomposting, as in vermiculture, worms, vermi. This involves 1 species of macroinvertebrate, red wiggler worms. You can see them up there in the top. That's my hands. They're called Icenia fetida. That's their scientific name. Red wigglers or red worms, or sometimes they're called manure worms. They're about 2 inches long. They're surface dwellers. They don't mind living in very little depth of material. Whereas night crawlers, inchworms, earthworms, much bigger, can't get very many in a bin, and they really like to live deep in the soil. So red wigglers are the ideal macroinvertebrate to put in a worm bin. Phone books or newsprint, you tear that up, you use that as bedding on the top of your bin. It keeps moisture in, it wicks up moisture from the stuff decomposing. It also forms a barrier that is a really good preventative for fruit flies. And phone books are, or newspaper are ideal to tear up for worm bedding. You can buy worm bins. The one that we have pictured here is called the Cano Worms. It's a multi-tier circular container on legs, so you don't have to lean over to the floor level. And the top tier is where the worms are working. You can see down here in the bottom photo, feeding it food scraps, keeping shredded paper covering the top. That adds carbon. It also keeps in moisture. It also keeps insects from developing, unless you put banana peels in there. And then the worms are working away. And when the worms graze on the microbes that are breaking down the stuff, the worm castings or worm poop drops down through holes molded in the trays. And you can harvest worm castings from the tray below the one that your worms are working in. It's a great system. You can also make worm bins out of Rubbermaid tubs. We offer classes in how to do vermicomposting. And it's a really good alternative, again, for apartment dwellers or for use in classrooms or even in the workplace. I'm going to skip past that one. Okay, let me see if anybody else has a question in the chat. What about the tool we were given, used to poke holes for aeration? If we turn it over, then the new stuff is toward the bottom when we're supposed to be able to take usable compost out. Yeah, Nellie, that's a challenge with that kind of, cylindrical kind of beehive shaped composter. In theory, when you are adding stuff to the top, you're sort of mixing that top layer. And so if you add in, let's say you put in a kitchen bucket of green matter, you want to also put in that equivalent volume of brown matter and mix up that stuff on the top. And you have to manage your stirring tool so that you don't go all the way to the bottom. Decomposition will be happening closer to the bottom. New stuff feeding will be happening closer to the top. But you can't logically be putting stuff in that bin every day and expect that bin to be able to handle a large volume of stuff coming out to it every day. That's where bringing material out to a composter, say, every couple of days, or and again, you have to be aware when you're adding a certain volume of green matter, you have to complement that with 3 times that volume of brown matter. But if when you're tearing up newspaper, it can be fluffy volume. It doesn't have to be compacted volume. I hope that's helpful. And I can't remember what the tool looks like that you all were able to get from the city of Manchester. Sorry, I don't remember that. Let's see, Eric, your question. Because the bins are so small, should we be aiming to keep the bin totally full? And how long do you expect the process to be in this size bin? If the bin was totally full and it was mixed up and you stopped adding anything to it, you could go back in there in about 6 weeks and compost would be ready to come out the bottom. It is a delicate process to use a bin with that limited amount of volume and be able to feed it continuously. It could be helpful to have another one of those composters, or perhaps once you have that bin going, to augment it with one that you make out of a 1 cubic yard one that you make out of, say, pallets, and have next to it. When you're composting in a relatively small volume container like that, it's kind of like your digestive system. If you just kept feeding yourself over and over again, or you kept feeding your cat over and over again, it would and couldn't handle anymore. This is the stir stick. But if I go to look at that link, I will bump myself out of Zoom. So I can't really do that while I'm giving a talk and hosting the talk. And I would bump you out of Zoom. Sorry. Can you compost rice that was prepared with a little bit of canola oil? Yeah, that'd probably be okay. That, wouldn't be the end of the world if you had a little of that rice left over. Yeah, especially because it's a vegetable oil. That was a good question. All of these are good questions. I just want to show you again how composting is happening at a commercial scale. because you can scale up the bin to a land-based composting system. And actually produce compost. And this might be something that you'd want to tap into as a homeowner, as a gardener, if you want to get compost in larger quantities than your system at home can produce. Now, this is commercial scale composting aerial views from a composting facility in California. Our company here in St. Louis is St. Louis Composting. I do have an aerial view in the slide coming up, but now my cat's drinking my glass of tea. St. Louis Composting didn't have good aerial shots when I made up this presentation. So, land, space, it's flat, managed so that nothing runs off and leaches into groundwater. Usually there's paved surface, could be asphalt, could be concrete that the material is laid out on, maybe it's gravel. And the process is managed so that stuff doesn't run off and contaminates rivers or streams or any other nearby body of water. Trucks come in, they dump the stuff. It's like you come out of your house with your container and you dump the stuff. You want to have the stuff in order for decomposition to be happening as fast as possible. You want to have your material, your organic material, ground. So at the Missouri Botanical Garden, when we take stuff off of our horticultural beds, our display beds, our team brings it back to a great big pile back in our facilities area. And when that pile gets so big, we bring in a tub grinder, which is what you see here, the piece of equipment on the bottom. You could, if you wanted to, grind up stuff in a blender or a food processor, but it'd be like a coarse grind. You don't want to make it soupy because that would make too much liquid in your compost. But what happens when you grind up material, and in this case, it includes sticks and brush and leaves and compostable plates from festivals and events, which are designed to be processed in a commercial composting facility like this. All of it is ground up, so you have tiny little particles that microorganisms can work on most effectively. And then typically, this is called windrow method of composting. The material is laid out in long rows, and a piece of equipment called a windrow turner is driven over it that goes and turns that pile and aerates it, and also can add water to it if necessary. The compost business operator monitors temperature and also takes samples for some laboratory assessment periodically to make sure that it's really temperature that achieves pathogen control. Anything that might be in animal feces, for example, or animal bedding, if that was accepted in a situation like this, or weed seeds would be killed by pathogens, killed by the heat of the compost pile. You couldn't stick your hand into one of these piles. You would be burned by the temperature in the pile. After about 6 to 8 weeks in a windrow, the stuff is moved onto curing piles, conical piles, interestingly enough, the same shape as the composters that you have in Manchester. And then material is screened after it's been in curing piles for about another 3 or 4 weeks. That screens out big chunks. It screens out any pollutants like pieces of plastic or anything, or cat paws in the picture. And then you have compost. So if you wanted to top dress your lawn with compost instead of buying commercial fertilizer, you could get it by the bag. You could get it by the scoop in your pickup truck from St. Louis Composting. You can also get that kind of material from Hanson's Tree Service up in St. Charles County, but it will not be produced by food waste. It will only be composted yard waste, because only St. Louis Composting is permitted to handle food waste. And you can mix that compost with garden soil. It's locally produced. It has almost no carbon footprint for transportation. It's a local job generator, and it's supercharged plant food. Here we have St. Louis Composting, our local business. This, I believe, is their facility in Marissa, Illinois. many, many, many windrows, those long rows of material that the machines drive over and turn. And what you will see when St. Louis Composting comes to an event or comes to a business or a school district, they come to us at the Missouri Botanical Garden, you'll see their logo, Total Organics Recycling. That's the part of their business that does the hauling, brings out bins, collects bins, moves material back and forth. But the parent company is St. Louis Composting. Let's see if I have any more questions in the Q&A. I don't see anything else in the chat, anything new in the chat. Something that you, hopefully people are doing out in Manchester, and this gives me an opportunity to promote this, is what's called rainscaping or green infrastructure, using plant-based options. Here you see a bioswale, a constructed landscape feature. This is on our parking lot at the Missouri Botanical Garden, where stormwater drains into that landscape feature and percolates down and infiltrates back down into the groundwater. Compost is a huge ingredient in this kind of constructed landscape feature. If you're interested in learning more about this, we have a really great, totally complete body of information about rainscaping on our website, mobot, mobot.org/rainscaping. And all of these little breakouts, all of these little balls here of graphic are strategies that can be used in various combinations on any kind of property to capture and manage stormwater where it falls, instead of conveying it away in culverts or gullies or storm drains or drainage ditches or things like that. Green infrastructure is a major movement for utilities like our Metropolitan Sewer District all over the country. And in fact, MSD is one of the leaders in making use of it, which is really good. This is a diagram of our, stop drinking my tea, of our parking lot at the Missouri Botanical Garden. Ah, biohazard cat. And this is what this line right up and down here, this is our big bioswale in the parking lot. This is what it looked like when we planted it. Pretty wimpy. You can see cars parked on either side. This is what it looks like today. It's a pretty glorious landscape feature, and it's a major demonstration of what has become a standard of practice, green infrastructure. And you have plants at the bottom, the soggy part of a installation like this, that are capable of having really wet feet. Plants like the sedges, plants like rosy turtlehead, that can go from flood to drought conditions and not miss a beat. Plant-based solutions like this are really, really great and very crucial, cost-effective stormwater management options, especially as we have more gully wash or rain events after real drought, because the storm sewers overflow and flooding can happen in places on streets and in backyards where it never happens when we have those kinds of incidences. So understanding rainscaping as a strategy, which makes big use of compost, is as just a shout out to what compost can do. A little more rainscaping in residential settings. This is another, I got to just put a plug in this as long as I'm talking to you out there in Manchester. This is the kind of thing that homeowners associations are just starting to do and accommodate for the aesthetics of. Many housing developments, condo developments, office parks, all have these kinds of water holding basins somewhere in them. Water drains off the sidewalks, it runs off the roofs, it runs off the roads, and it comes into this kind of a settling basin. When you plant around that water feature with native plants and you create an actual aquatic ecosystem, first of all, you will attract predators like dragonflies and other predators that will keep mosquito populations down. Whereas if it's just water in a pit, it's an ideal mosquito breeding situation. You will not attract Canada geese, which are beautiful, but become pest species when they walk around on the grass and poop on the grass and attack you when they're breeding, because Canada geese want to see out in all directions when they're sitting on a body of water. And if they can't, because there are native plants planted around the perimeter, they will not nest there. So pests will go bye-bye. And when you're doing this kind of planting process, compost is really, really a great alternative. You do not need chemical fertilizers. This is, slightly other topic, but I got to put it up because in the part of town that you are in Manchester, there are a lot of these kinds of housing developments. Local farmers, urban farmers, gardeners, community gardeners, all of them rely on compost, making compost, using compost, not synthetic fertilizers. Composting is not hard, but it is a backbone of food production at any kind of scale. And some research on using compost is being done, supported by organizations like Slow Food St. Louis. There are a couple of farms that are certified by Known and Grown St. Louis, our regional local food brand, that are ones I mentioned earlier, that will contract with you to come and take your kitchen scraps if you want to do that, and then either bring you compost or use the compost that they make from that valet collection service for their farms. And we are starting to have, we have actually several of those little, very mom and pop enterprises now. It's kind of like, it's kind of like, I don't know what else to analogize it to, but Known and Grown St. Louis, our regional local food brand, is also a way to learn about those farmers that are doing that kind of community composting. And we'll hear more about that when our regional food waste message comes out. So, cycles, not lines, cycles. Goes around, comes around. That's the way it works in the natural world. And this graphic, this was done for us many years ago by a really brilliant woman and a very gifted artist, Nancy Margulies. I met her when she lived in U City. She lived in Ladue for a while where her kids were growing up, and then she lives out in California now. She can draw the proceedings of a conference. If Nancy Margulies was working with me, she would be drawing what I would be saying as I'm talking about it. Very, very gifted. And she did this cycles graphic for us at the Earthway Center so that you can see plants grow, they have their season, then they lose their leaves, they shrivel up, they die. That material returns to the soil. The decomposers on the bottom break it down so that the soil is enriched, nothing is wasted, and new plants grow. It is elegant. It is time tested. It is a proven technology to manage waste, and nature has it down. We mimic that when we compost. We have our Green Resources Answer Service at the Missouri Botanical Garden. So if you have questions that were not answered tonight, and we still have another minute or so I see the chat just came up, you can email at any time or call if you want your question to us, greenresources@mobot, mobot.org. The phone number, it's a pretty good mnemonic phone number, 314-577-0246. I am the Green Resources Manager at the garden. I am the primary person who responds to these questions. So your questions will come right to me. I tap into my colleagues. I tap into my research skills to look up things if I don't know the answer to the question, and sometimes refer them to our horticulture answer service. And then the other thing I get to point out when I give these talks, my personal environmental community service is a show that I've done since 1989 called Earthworms on KDHX, St. Louis Independent Media. It is a podcast now. It was live on the air for many years and has been a podcast since 2015. And when you listen to these programs, they're just a conversation, no bells, no whistles. Conversation. There's a wonderful series that I've been calling Earthworms on the Farm, interviews with local urban and suburban farmers and nearby rural who are part of Known and Grown, our regional local food brand. So if you want to know more about that thriving spectrum of local food production and local food access, that's a good place to hear it. I'm going to stop sharing here and see what else is in the chat. Okay, so Megan, your councilwoman, Megan Huther, says you're working on getting a composting lab going. This will have an earth machine, the beehive-shaped composters that you all have, a tumbler, and open air composting methods for the community to learn about the various kinds of composters and techniques. Hosted at a local community garden. Yay, Megan, that's a great idea. Stay tuned for more information. That's a way to tap in to the enthusiasm and the skills and the community contributions of folks who want to be a part of a community garden and also have that kind of demonstration. What a great development from your efforts starting in early in 2020 to get composting equipment and knowledge and encouragement out to residents of Manchester. Good for you. Any other questions? Anything else? I think composting is one of the most elemental and simple and essential things that we can do. Not everybody can do it. Not everybody has the energy or the patience or the space or the inclination. But when you do, you can do it in a very simple system. Like I said, I showed you my pile. It's a pile. It doesn't stink. It doesn't attract vermin because I don't put any animal products on it. My dog doesn't get into it. Possums don't get into it. We do not have rats or raccoons in my yard. It's just a way to manage organic matter, in this case, plant-based organic matter, in a way that doesn't need to send it anywhere. I can make use of it. If I'm going to plant a plant, plant a new tree, plant new bushes, want to put any of that compost on my yard, I just kind of shove it away from the edges and dig some out. And there it is. It's wonderful. And it helps us humans connect to the processes and the energies of the natural world, which, thanks to little non-living bits of protein coated with fat, we all, many of us, reconnected to the benefits of nature and being in nature and learning about how nature does things. Decomposition, woo, the Tesla of ecological systems. I used to say the Cadillac, but that flies in the face of preventing climate change. So I see it's a couple minutes after 8, just about an hour from when we started. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councilman Megan Huther. Thank you, Tyler J. Cox. Thanks, folks from Manchester who were here and who may be viewing this as a recording after the fact. I'm Jean Ponzi from the Missouri Botanical Garden, the Earthway Center. You can send us your questions at greenresources@mobot, MOBOT.org. And come out and see our origami in the garden, our summer art display. It's not nighttime, it's not lit up, but we do have some evening hours, early evening up until twilight hours. Origami in the garden looks like folded paper, but it's really folded metal. It's pretty cool.
Jean, on behalf of the city of Manchester and all the participants, thank you very much for your time tonight. Very informative, and I definitely learned a lot about composting tonight, and I appreciate it.
Yay. Go forth and decay.
Yep, that's what I'm going to do tonight. I'm not going to be able to sleep. That's all I'm going to be able to think about. How am I going to start?
All right. Thanks, everyone.